Good morning. My name is James Valentine, and welcome to the externally led, patient-focused drug development meeting on sensorineural hearing loss. I'm here in the studio with my co-host Barbara Kelly from the Hearing Loss Association of America, and we're coming to you live from the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, actually not too far from where the Food and Drug Administration headquarters are located. To open today's meeting, it is my pleasure to introduce Barbara Kelly, the Executive Director of HLAA, to provide some welcoming remarks. Barbara?
Thank you, James. Welcome to the externally led patient-focused drug development meeting on sensorineural hearing loss. It's my pleasure to be here as the Executive Director of the Hearing Loss Association of America. For more than 40 years, our mission has been to open the world of communication to people with hearing loss through information, education, support, and advocacy. The voice of the person with hearing loss has always been key to our work and has pushed our advocacy goals forward. We've seen improvements in technology, research, and policy, and we know the voice of people with hearing loss is important to more advances. Thank you to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration for giving us permission to hold this meeting and for attending today. Thank you to our generous supporters who financially sponsored this meeting. It could not have happened without your support. And we are so pleased to have 58 partner organizations for this meeting. They are advocacy and professional organizations, companies, federal agencies, and universities from across the world who support hearing healthcare research and solutions. This is a testament to the enormity of the importance of hearing loss as a global public health issue. This year on May 3rd, World Hearing Day, sponsored by the World Health Organization, the World Hearing Forum published the World Report on Hearing. The report shows the financial impact of untreated hearing loss, but it also reports on what we're going to hear today, when people with hearing loss share their stories about disruption and sometimes distress when communication breaks down. And this happens with all degrees of hearing loss. Ask anyone, there's no such thing as a small hearing loss. Many of you know the popular words from Helen Keller, but it's worth repeating. Helen was both deaf and blind, and as she said, blindness cuts us off from things, but deafness cuts us off from people. We realized profoundly the effect of being cut off from people during this past year with COVID. Many experienced loneliness, isolation, anxiety, and depression, which are all associated with hearing loss. And for some people with hearing loss, COVID added another layer of isolation. This meeting today puts an exclamation point on qualitative research which reflects reality. You'll hear today the reality of living daily with hearing loss from those with varying degrees of hearing loss using different technologies and strategies to go to school, work, enjoy second careers, or retirement life. And to people with hearing loss and your loved ones who are listening today, we invite you to call in or write in during the program. We want to hear as many perspectives as possible. Even if it's a positive aspect, we want to hear from you. And as one of our panelists shared ahead of this meeting, our stories are important. We've been pleased to work with the FDA in planning this meeting, and here to provide opening comments from the FDA is Dr. Gavin Imparato, Medical Officer within the Office of Tissues and Advanced Therapies within FDA's Center for Biologics, Evaluation, and Research. This is part of the FDA that oversees new cell and gene therapy products. Thank you, Dr. Imparato, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be joining you today for this patient-focused drug development meeting. I'd like to first thank the Hearing Loss Association of America, Barbara, and all the staff, all of the industry sponsors, organizations, and of course, the patients who are joining us. Patient-focused drug development is such a critical element of developing and ultimately, hopefully, approving new therapies that have a transformative effect on people's lives. And we at the FDA are very excited about the role of patient-focused drug development. So I'd like to give a bit of a background on the whole process of drug development and reflect more specifically on the Office of Tissue and Advanced Therapies within the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, to give everyone a sense of the overall framework for how products are developed, what role the FDA plays, and how critical patient voices are in this process. So most of the time we hear about the FDA in the media when a new drug or device or biologic is approved. And I liken this to a commencement ceremony. If you were to think of drug development as an educational pathway. So it's a moment of obvious exaltation because it's the crowning achievement of many years of work that ultimately precedes that official approval. Of course, there are many years and many steps that are required before a college graduate walks across the stage at commencement and receives their degree. And that development as a person, as a student, as a member of society starts in pre-K. A young person is protean in their worldview, and they go through a series of steps that helps them to form into the complete person who ultimately receives their degree. The same can be thought of the process of drug development. So the FDA is actually involved at every step along that pathway, and that's often something that people in the general public don't see. Because so much of the focus is on ultimate approval, but we're very involved at every step before that. And this is where the role of engaging with patients and organizations like the Hearing Loss Association of America is so critical, particularly for the products that we regulate within the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research and within the Office of Tissues and Advanced Therapies. The reason for this is manifold. There has been an absolute explosion in our understanding of the basic mechanisms of disease over the past several decades, and in particular, genetic mechanisms of disease. And there's also been concomitantly an explosion in technologies that have enabled us to think about new types of treatments that years ago would have seemed like science fiction. What's come of that is the possibility of offering new treatments to people for conditions or diseases that years ago would have seemed impossible. And this is extremely exciting. It also presents a number of challenges. One of the major challenges, of course, from our perspective at the FDA, is how we ensure the safety and efficacy of new products that are being developed. And so a first step in developing our framework for evaluating safety and efficacy of products is understanding the condition. And there's no better way to understand a condition, particularly complex conditions like sensorineural hearing loss, that have so many effects on an individual's life, their ability to function, how they feel on a daily basis. And we at the FDA are so excited about the opportunity to hear from patients because their voices are so critical in that whole process of how we think about the safety and efficacy framework of these new therapies. So I really want to thank all of the patients who are joining us today. Your courage, your candor, the work that you're putting into this is tremendously appreciated. It really has enormous value to us. I feel that we often don't get to express that gratitude. But I'll tell you, as a physician, as a medical officer, for all my colleagues, our day-to-day work involves patients who we don't necessarily see or know, but we are in the trenches of making difficult decisions about patients and their lives. And the better that we understand their concerns and their perspective, the better we're able to execute the work that we have to do from a regulatory perspective. So thank you personally, and thank you on behalf of the FDA, because your participation is absolutely critical. I think of the broad ecosystem of developing new drugs, biologics, and devices as a team effort, and patients are a critical part of that team. It's actually astonishing and a bit unfortunate that patient-focused drug development is a relatively new development. For many years in medicine, in the practice of medicine, the voice of the patient was really not seen as a critical element of the provision of care. We think totally differently about clinical practice and also drug development with regard to patients, because the reason the United States Food and Drug Administration exists is to protect and promote the public health of the country. And for conditions like sensorineural hearing loss, we have to hear from patients to understand their concerns, and so that we can better execute the regulatory role that we have. So I mentioned to you some broad strokes about how products are developed at FDA. I want to reflect a little bit about the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research and the Office of Tissues and Advanced Therapies. So you can think of the FDA as having essentially three large components of categories, rather, of new products: drugs, devices, and biologics. There's a lot of complexity. There are many more moving parts to the FDA, and that's a bit of an oversimplification, but I think it's helpful just to understand the broad organization. So drugs are things that you think of when you think of drugs, things that you would purchase at a local pharmacy. It also includes things that would be administered in a hospital setting, like chemotherapies. Devices, of course, are things like pacemakers, implanted defibrillators, a variety of products that can be implanted surgically, artificial spinal discs, valves, heart valves, those kinds of things. And then the final category, which is the most really mechanistically complex, and the most complex from a regulatory perspective, but I think also the most exciting and has the most potential to really revolutionize the care of patients, is biologics. So biologics refers to a diverse range of things that one administers to the human body that are designed to prevent or treat a disease or condition, that are derived from some type of biological system. So I'll give you some examples of this. The vaccines that have been recently authorized for COVID-19 under emergency use are regulated by the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. Products like antivenom, if you're bitten by a rattlesnake. Products like allergenic extracts, if you have allergies and you receive immunotherapy shots. If you had blood loss and were treated in a hospital and needed an infusion of blood or another blood derivative, that would be regulated by the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. So there are a variety of treatments that one doesn't often think about when you think about a drug or a treatment, but they're absolutely critical. In the Office of Tissues and Advanced Therapies, our particular purview is gene and cell therapies. And as I mentioned earlier, there's been an absolute explosion in our understanding of the genetic basis of disease. What this means from the perspective of developing new therapies is that we're now able to think about targeting things using gene and cell therapies, mechanisms of disease that we never could before. And that poses a variety of challenges. In the process of helping our industry and academic sponsors to develop their new products, we have an interactive process where we discuss the clinical development programs and give feedback about how we think clinical trials should be designed, what are meaningful clinical endpoints. So in other words, when a trial is designed, the purpose is to evaluate its effect, the safety and efficacy of the new product in human subjects. And for the products that we regulate, there often isn't a precedent. Gene and cell therapies are a relatively new arrival on the scene. And so we have products that are inherently complex, because of their biology and their mechanism. And we also have conditions like sensorineural hearing loss that are not typical of what we think of when we think of a disease process. And the role of patient-focused drug development, I really can't emphasize it enough, is so critical, because when we decide on these critical parameters for how we evaluate safety and efficacy, taking into consideration the lived patient experience of how patients with a condition feel and function is just so critical. So we're absolutely thrilled to be joining you today. The FDA is not an adversarial, monolithic group of people. We're 18,000 human beings, and we're patients too. We have friends and relatives, and we are personally affected by so many of the diseases and conditions that we regulate. So I want to assure you that on the other side of that FDA wall are a lot of very caring, capable people who really go to work every single day with the singular goal of protecting and promoting public health. We exist to facilitate drug development, and we exist to serve patients. So thank you also to the industry sponsors. You're in the trenches. We commend you for all the hard work that you're doing. We don't often get to interact in these kinds of formats where we're liberated to encourage you in that way, because many of our interactions are formal in nature. But please know that you have our support and encouragement. You're advocating on behalf of your patients. The Hearing Loss Association of America is advocating on behalf of patients. And patients, you are the true stars of the show, and we commend you for your bravery and for your courage. We know it's no mean feat to share the details of your personal struggles and how conditions affect you. So we really want to extend our most heartfelt thank you. And again, thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you to the Hearing Loss Association of America. We're really very pleased to join you for today's meeting. And you won't see me on video, but I will be here jotting down notes in my notebook, and very much look forward to sharing them with my colleagues at FDA. Thank you so much again. Back to you, Barbara.
Thank you, Dr. Imparato, and to all the thousands of people who work at the FDA. That was really great to hear that. Now here to provide a clinical overview of hearing loss is Dr. Frank Lin. He's the director of the Cochlear Center for Hearing and Public Health and professor of otolaryngology, head and neck surgery at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Welcome, Dr. Lin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Lin, and I'm a professor of otolaryngology at Johns Hopkins. And I want to thank the Hearing Loss Association of America for inviting me to present to you today on the topic of sensorineural hearing loss to lead off this externally led patient-focused drug development meeting. What I've been asked to do today is to give a broad overview specific around sensorineural hearing loss. And what I like to do then is to briefly touch on first just some physiology and epidemiologic prevalence of hearing loss, then briefly talk then about some of the implications of sensorineural hearing loss for children and then for adults separately. And finally, then touch at the very end on some of our current approaches to clinical management of hearing loss. So when we talk about hearing, I think it's helpful to begin what I mean by hearing. And when I think about hearing fundamentally occurring in two steps. On the top left there, that is what a complicated sound like speech looks like. It's composed of different frequencies. Each frequency has a different intensity and is all progressed in real time. So the first step per se in being able to hear is what the cochlea does. The inner ear, the peripheral auditory system takes in that very, very complicated acoustic signal and converts that signal, transduces that signal into a neural code that then goes to the brain, and the brain then has to decode the signal. So from an engineering point of view, all hearing is really encoding in the inner ear and decoding in the brain. Now, when we then talk about sensorineural hearing loss, fundamentally what we're talking about then is impairments in the cochlea. The cochlea is all comprised of primarily post-mitotic cells that can't regenerate. So over a lifetime of exposure to noise, aging, other sort of metabolic or drug insults over time, we can all develop some degree of hearing loss as some of those cells die off and can't regenerate. And this is what we usually mean when we say sensorineural hearing loss. Now, importantly, when we develop sensorineural hearing loss, the issue is then, it's not only that you can't hear soft sounds, for instance. The bigger issue is that there's distortion in that sound encoding by the inner ear. So in the cochlea, instead of being able to crisply and precisely encode every single one of those little peaks in that sound spectrogram you see, it's a much more garbled auditory encoding. And that's why if we ever talk to anyone who has a hearing loss, what they'll say to us, they'll say, it's not that I can't hear you, it's that I can't understand you. And the reason for that, again, is because the signal that goes from the impaired cochlea to the brain, instead of being a very, very crisp and clear signal, it's a much more garbled signal. Now, when we talk then about measuring hearing, it's important to understand there are many, many ways of measuring someone's hearing function. But one of the most foundational, basic ways we start with is with something called the audiogram. And what the audiogram does, or a pure tone audiometry does, it basically measures how loud sounds have to be for us to detect them. On the x-axis on audiogram is the pitch of the sound, how the frequency of the sound going from low pitch on the left to high pitch on the right. And then we measure at each of these different pitches how loud the sound has to be for someone to detect it. This is in decibels, going from 0 decibels at the very, very top, a very, very soft sound, all the way to 80 or 90 or 100, which is very, very loud. Typically, we say that when someone can hear sounds about 20 to 25 decibels or softer, that's considered normal hearing. 20 to 25 decibels is roughly like a soft whisper, for instance. And then from there, if the sound has between 20 and 40, roughly, we call that a mild hearing loss. Between 40 and 60 to 70 is called a moderate hearing loss, and so on and so forth. Now, a lot of times, the way we'll summarize someone's hearing, especially when classifying someone as having hearing loss or not, we'll classify it based on, we'll average the 4 frequencies are most important for speech, which is basically between 500 and 4,000 hertz. That's where the bulk of speech energy is. And we'll average it just to give a level of how loud speech sounds typically have to be for someone to detect it. And that's what's called a pure tone average. And a lot of times we'll base on someone's better hearing ear, just to be a little more conservative. Obviously, if a good ear and a bad ear, the good ear is usually how we classify someone's hearing for epidemiologic purposes. Now, when we look at this then, how common a hearing loss is by age decade, this is based on data from the United States, we see that the prevalence of a hearing loss is basically a pure tone average greater than 25 decibels, which when hearing loss is typically considered to be clinically significant, we see it increase dramatically across a lifespan. In young children, about 1 to 2 in 1,000 children are born deaf or with a severe hearing loss. So it's obviously just very, very low percentage relatively there. But over the lifetime, as we accumulate aging, noise exposure effects, we see the prevalence of hearing is basically double with every age decade, such that by the time we look at older adults who are 70 years and older, then nearly 2 out of every 3 adults in the United States over 70 has a significant hearing loss. Now, importantly, if we project this forward now for the next 40 years, we're seeing these numbers increase dramatically. Namely, we're about 40 million adults right now in 2020 having hearing loss, and by 2060, 40 million Americans, 73.5 million Americans are projected to have hearing loss in 2060. And the reason for this growth per se is mainly because of the growth and the increase in the number of older adults. Everyone lives longer. The absolute risk of hearing loss likely isn't going up at all, might be slightly decreasing, but purely just because of the number of older adults, we're seeing more people with hearing loss over time. Now, if we transition now and let's talk a little more about the implications of hearing loss, I'm going to talk about the implications of hearing loss differently for children than for adults, mainly because they're very, very different populations. When we talk about hearing loss in children, what we're typically concerned about is children who are born with a severe hearing loss or even profoundly deaf, who have no access to sound very early in life. And that's important because the way our brain uses sound is there's a fundamental hierarchy of how we begin to use sound and how that sound allows us to develop language. Mainly at the very, very get-go with auditory, you need to have auditory awareness, namely detection of sounds, you need to detect it. As you learn to detect sounds, you can learn to discriminate different sounds. That then allows for recognition of what a sound means, also allows for identification of certain sounds and the comprehension. And importantly, as we think then about children who have early auditory deprivation, early auditory loss, opening a higher level of processing fundamentally depends on the earlier critical period experience. You can't jump from one level to another, for instance. Now, importantly, this hierarchy also carries forward. As we think then about language comprehension, be able to understand what your mother is saying, for instance, that ultimately allows us to learn how to speak, to produce language, which then serves the basis later for being able to read and also be able to write. So it all functions in a hierarchy. At the same time, this hierarchy proceeds on the right side too as well, where language comprehension fundamentally serves the basis for effective communication between a child and a caregiver, right? The dyadic relationship between a son and a mother, or a daughter and his mother or father, are critical for that dyadic relationship. And that in turn serves the basis or foundation for development of our later cognition, affect, and social interaction. And because of this long-standing recognition of how important or how the detrimental impact that auditory deprivation can have on a child early in life, it's basically why we have now, throughout the United States, many parts of the world, we have universal newborn hearing screening. At birth, children are screened for hearing loss very, very early, so that if it is present, we can begin addressing it immediately, so we can progress through these stages, this hierarchy as quickly as possible, as opposed to having a long period of auditory deprivation. When we talk then about adults, though, it's a bit different. So adults who have hearing loss, we're typically not talking about congenital hearing losses, the hearing loss that occur later in life, again, through process of aging, noise exposure, other factors that lead to hearing loss later in life. Importantly, epidemiologic research now, really over the last 5 to 10 years now, has really begun to lay out the foundation for why this hearing loss is also as critically important for adults as it is for children. Namely, in these epidemiologic studies now, we're finding that hearing loss is consistently an independent risk factor for things like dementia and brain aging, healthcare expenditures, healthcare utilization, and also even impaired physical function, the risk of progressing to disability or to a fall or needing a nursing home, for instance. And importantly, this isn't just correlation. We think, in fact, there are hypothesized mechanisms that directly link hearing loss to these broader outcomes, namely things like cognitive load, brain structural changes, social isolation, or loss of environmental sound cues. To take you through an example where a lot of research has been done over the last 10 years, specifically looking at hearing loss and risk of dementia. And again, we think it's not just driven by a common cause or a common pathological process, not just correlation. We think, in fact, that the direct mechanisms through which hearing loss can contribute to these much broader outcomes, namely through things like cognitive load. If the brain's constantly receiving a much more garbled auditory signal from the ear, we understand now the brain constantly has to dedicate more energy, more resources to dealing with hearing, that degraded signal, and then comes at the expense of our thinking memory abilities. At the same time, we're seeing in studies down the middle that hearing loss can actually lead to faster rates of brain atrophy, which then affects function as well. And finally, hearing loss can clearly contribute to social isolation or loneliness, which can in turn affect risk of cognitive impairment and dementia over time. Importantly, this carries over to larger epidemiologic studies that have really examined this, and the best data has come from, the best summaries have come from the Lancet Commission on Dementia, where in 2017 and 2020, they commissioned these very, very large systematic meta-analytic reviews, review all the literature on dementia risk factors. And what they effectively concluded in 2 of the reports in 2017, again in 2020, is identified hearing loss in mid and late life as being single-handedly the largest risk factor for dementia of all known risk factors at present. Importantly, this also carries over to other downstream effects. If we look at hearing loss and healthcare utilization outcomes or healthcare cost outcomes, this was research done in collaboration with the AARP and Optum Labs. We see on average that people with hearing loss have a greater risk of needing an ED visit, of having a longer or readmission to the hospital over time, longer hospital stays, as well as a greater rate of hospitalization over time. And that's directly reflected in healthcare costs on the bottom right. So these are all healthcare costs not related to hearing loss treatment. These are non-hearing loss treatment related costs. We see over a 2, 5, and 10-year period that people with hearing loss basically have greater healthcare expenditures over time. Now, this sort of begs a question then, does that mean, well, if we treat hearing loss in adults, does that in fact reduce the risk of things like dementia, other adverse health outcomes? We actually don't know yet. The reason why we don't know this is from observational studies, you can't tell what the effects of, let's say, using a hearing aid is, because people are very different. People who get hearing aids are very different from those who don't. So it's very hard disentangling that just from observational data. What's really needed is a randomized controlled trial where half the people get hearing loss treatment, other half just get sort of a control group, and we see what happens. A trial like that is ongoing right now. This is funded by the National Institute on Aging. This trial involved 1,000 older adults who were randomized from 2018 to 2019 to either hearing loss treatment versus essentially a control group, and they're all being followed now for 3 years. When this trial is finished in 2023, it'll provide more or less definitive evidence of whether treating hearing loss, in fact, reduces things like cognitive decline, brain aging, and healthcare costs. Now, in conclusion now, when we talk then about the clinical management of hearing loss briefly, our current management really is predicated on what I would say is clinic-based auditory rehabilitation, one-on-one sessions with a patient and typically an audiologist or otolaryngologist like me if there's more medical issues involved. And finally is based on looking at auditory needs, what the child or the adult needs. And then finally, sensory management with hearing aids or other type of hearing assistive technologies. For those with more severe hearing losses where hearing aids would be less beneficial is when patients are also evaluated for things like cochlear implantation, which can allow for restoration of auditory input to the inner ear and to the brain for those with severe hearing loss where hearing aids would no longer be beneficial. Now, this is the current management. Current novel approaches under development right now include alternative service delivery models. So rather than one-on-one care in a clinic-based setting, can we in fact do this via telehealth with a remote provider? And or could we have healthcare extenders like a community healthcare worker deliver a basic level of hearing care in the community? Given if there's so many people with hearing loss, we may need other service delivery models. At the same time, something currently under development, which is very exciting, is the idea of direct consumer access to over-the-counter hearing aids. Right now in the United States, the way hearing aids are regulated is you can really only purchase one if you go through a licensed provider. With advances in technology over the last 20 years, clearly there is the ability now for consumers to buy a safe and effective hearing aid over the counter, but currently these are not available. But fortunately, because of legislation passed in 2017, the FDA is now mandated to issue and draft and release these over-the-counter hearing aid regulations that would ensure that consumers could access a safe and effective hearing aid over the counter. These should hopefully be released soon. They're due out in 2020, but because of COVID, there's been a delay. And finally, there's also clearly ongoing innovations in terms of amplification strategies and signal processing for how we can better have better algorithms for manipulating the auditory signal through a hearing aid or cochlear implant to allow for a clear signal. What's clearly not here in this figure yet, or this thing, is anything around pharmacologic management of hearing loss, which currently really aren't available, but which may represent a paradigm shift. Rather than focusing on purely rehabilitation, future drug therapies could potentially be neurorestorative. But then the question is, how do we evaluate such technologies or such drugs, and how do we evaluate whether they're effective for patients with hearing loss? So thank you all for your attention, and thank you again to the Hearing Loss Association of America for inviting me to present to you.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. So James, let's get started. James Valentine is the moderator for today. He's an attorney with Hyman, Phelps, and McNamara in Washington, D.C. We're in good hands with James. He was previously with the FDA, where he served as a patient liaison, helping bring patient voices into FDA decisions and help to create the patient-focused drug development program. Since joining his firm in 2014, James has helped plan and moderate more than 35 of these externally led PFDD meetings. We've really enjoyed James being our partner over the months leading up to today. It's my pleasure to welcome James Valentine. James?
Yeah, thank you so much, Barbara, and it's such a pleasure to be here today and help in moderating today's meeting. So now that we've heard a clinical overview from a disease expert, we turn to the core of today's meeting, which is to hear from you, individuals living with hearing loss and their direct care partners and caregivers about the experience of persons living with hearing loss. PFDD is a more systematic way of gathering patient perspectives on their condition and on available treatments. And as you heard from FDA's Dr. Gavin Imperato, your input can help inform the agency's understanding of hearing loss in order to inform drug development and review. So today marks the 47th externally led patient-focused drug development meeting, And due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, this is actually the 14th fully virtual EL-PFDD meeting of its kind. With over 7,000 known rare diseases and many more, additional thousands of more prevalent conditions, this is truly a unique and important opportunity for this community. I'm going to describe a little bit about today's meeting, which is one that is interactive. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we'll be asking of you and how today's meeting will be organized. First, we'll be exploring the patient and caregiver experience with living with hearing loss and its impacts on your daily life. Then, in our second session, we'll bring everyone back together to explore the various approaches to treatment, and we'll be asking you for your preferences for future treatment. Within these two overarching topics, what will our discussions look like? Well, today we're going to be using primarily 3 different methods to hear from you. First, we're going to hear from panels of individuals with hearing loss. They are going to help share their experiences in order to set a good foundation for the discussion. The panelists were selected to represent a range of experiences with hearing loss and treatments for hearing loss. However, we know that no one panel or a couple of panels could accurately capture the full range of experiences, which is why it's going to be so important to hear from all of you. So we will build on those panelist discussions through a live audience discussion with all of you, individuals living with hearing loss, caregivers of individuals with hearing loss who are tuned in live today. We'll ask that you build on what we've heard from the panels. I'll be asking questions and inviting you to provide comments. This can be done in one of 2 ways. We'll be providing you with a phone number that you can use to dial in and share your comments live today. We'll be inviting you periodically throughout, and we'll hope to hear your voices. You also can submit written comments at any point throughout today's session, which Barbara will be sharing periodically throughout. You'll see that there's a comment box underneath the live stream onto the web page for today's meeting. We'll also be joined with a panel of individuals living with hearing loss via Zoom to participate in that discussion as well. And then finally, we're going to broaden the discussion through use of polling questions. We're going to ask our individuals that are living with hearing loss and their caregivers to use their phone to respond. Or if you're following along on your computer, you can use a browser on your computer as well. We actually encourage you to go ahead and get on this system now, so that way you'll be there and you can actually stay on that web page throughout the entire course of today's meeting, as the questions will automatically change as we move throughout the day. You can pull out your phone and open a tab, or you can open a new tab in a web browser and go to pollev.com/HLAA. Again, feel free to go there now. That's pollev.com/HLAA. And we'll be getting to polling very soon, but wanted to give you a head start on getting there. And we're going to use these polling questions to broaden the discussion to everyone and help aid in the discussion. We'll also provide an opportunity to give additional written comments for 30 days after today's meeting using that same web comment form. All of today's input and the written input submitted after the meeting will be summarized in what's called a Voice of the Patient report, which is a summary of today's meeting, which will be provided to the Food and Drug Administration, as well as made available more broadly for the research and development community. One last thing before we get started is to cover a few ground rules for today's discussion. We want to encourage individuals living with hearing loss and their caregivers to contribute to the dialogue. Do this through polling, through phone calls, through written comments. The discussion today will be limited to individuals with hearing loss and their family members and other direct caregivers only. Our colleagues at the FDA, drug developers, and clinicians are here to listen. I also want to mention that views today are going to be inherently personal, and the discussion may even get emotional at times. So respect for one another is paramount. So to that end, I ask that you please try to be focused and concise in your comments so we can hear from as many voices as possible. So let's go ahead and get to it. We're going to go to our first set of polling questions, which are some questions to give us a sense of who we have in our audience today. So please go ahead again, pull out your phone, open that browser or open a new tab on your web browser and go to pollev.com /HLAA. And again, these polling questions are for our individuals living with hearing loss and their direct caregivers. So as you can see here in our first polling question, we want to know, are you either A, an individual living with hearing loss, or B, a relative or care partner of someone with hearing loss? We're going to give you a few moments to make sure everyone gets into the system. We'll be able to track your responses live as well as incorporate those into the voice of the patient report. So we want to give everybody a chance to answer these questions. So results are still coming in, but as it stands, it looks like of our members of the hearing loss community today, participation is about a little over 80% are individuals living with hearing loss themselves, and we're seeing a little under 20% as representatives of the community as direct caregivers of those living with hearing loss. So if we can move to our next polling question. So at this point, Ford, we want to ask you to answer these questions on behalf of the person living with hearing loss. So if you're a caregiver, please answer this for the person with hearing loss for whom you care. So where do you, or if you're a caregiver, the person who lives with, who has hearing loss, where do they currently reside? The options are A, the U.S. Pacific time zone, B, U.S. Mountain Time, C, U.S. Central Time, D, U.S. Eastern Time, E, U.S. Alaska Time, F, U.S. Hawaii Time, G, Europe, H, the Middle East, I, Asia, J, Canada, J, Canada, K, Mexico, L, Australia, or M, some other region or country not represented in any of the other response options. So we'll give you a few more moments here to get your responses in. It looks like we have good representation across most of the U.S. Time zones, with the largest representation being from U.S. Eastern Time, but we do have good representation across U.S. Central, Mountain, and Pacific time zones. We do have some participants from Europe, the Middle East, and Canada, as well as other regions not listed on this slide. We can move to our third polling question. So here, the question is, are you or your loved one with hearing loss either A, female, B, male, C, non-binary, or D, prefer not to identify? So again, if you're a caregiver, please answer on behalf of the person with hearing loss for whom you care. We'll give you a few more moments here. So it looks like we're seeing a little bit of a consistent split here. About 60% of our participants with hearing loss are female, and about 40% are male. And then we do have participants with hearing loss that are non-binary, or the person for whom our caregiver cares is non-binary. We're seeing a little bit of responses coming in here. We just want to make sure we capture everybody. Okay, so if we can move to our fourth polling question. Here we want to know, how old are you or your loved one that you care for with hearing loss? The options are A, 18 to 30 years of age, B, 31 to 50 years of age, C, 51 to 60 years of age, D, 61 to 70 years of age, or E, 71 years of age or older. So how old are you or your loved one with hearing loss currently?
James, that's very representative. You see, we have the most in 71 years of age or older, where the incidence of hearing loss is probably the highest.
Mm-hmm. But great to see that we do have representation today across all of these age ranges. We're very interested to hear from you when you share live later in the meeting, what is the cause of your hearing loss, that we may see different patterns across the different age groups. So very want to make sure we hear from all different age groups throughout the session today. So as Barbara mentioned, as it stands, we're seeing about a little over a third of our participants today, 71 years of age or older, but we're seeing, just over or under 20% for each of the middle age ranges, 30 to 50, 51 to 60, and 61 to 70. And we do have some participants, about just under 5%, that are living with hearing loss from age 18 to 30. If we go to our next polling question. So now we want to know about what was the age that you or your loved one first have symptoms of hearing loss. And so here our options are A, birth to 18, B, 19 to 30 years of age, C, 31 to 50 years of age, D, 51 to 60 years of age, E, 61 to 70 years of age, or F, if your first symptoms of hearing loss were at age 71 years of age or older.
James, it looks like we have a really good representation from all the age groups.
Yes, we're seeing a shift here from the last polling question that we had, where it was shifted to the older age ranges. Here you're seeing that many of those people clearly have been living with hearing loss since a very young age, with about 40% of our participants having had their first symptoms of hearing loss in childhood. But we do see, again, good representation across all age ranges of first symptoms of hearing loss being all throughout life. We can go to our sixth polling question. So here we want to know a little bit about your hearing loss. Is it A, in the right ear, B, in the left ear, or C, in both ears? We'll give you a few moments here. I promise these polling questions will be a little harder to answer, require a little bit more thought later in the program, but again, we really want to get a sense of who's in our audience, who we have represented today. So we're seeing that we have a very high percentage of our individuals represented today with hearing loss in both ears. We do see some unilateral hearing loss from people living with hearing loss in their right ear. At this time, it doesn't appear we have anyone who only has hearing loss only in their left ear. Okay, if we can go to our, that just changed, always getting more responses trickling in. So we do have a few people, a handful of people in each of only the right ear or the left ear. So again, we'll be interested to hear about the causes of hearing loss, how that's differed, based off of whether you have hearing loss in one ear or both ears throughout the program today. And so if we go to our last polling question, we want to know here, what form of hearing loss do you or your loved one have? So we'll start to get a sense of this question that I've been mentioning. We have A, sudden onset, B, genetically based or hereditary, C, post-head or ear trauma, D, post-loud noise exposure, E, medication that was toxic to the ear, F, after a disease or virus, G, autoimmune disease, H, Meniere's disease, I, from a tumor, J, from aging, K, if you were unable to determine the cause, or L, if you're unsure of the cause. I'll give you.
James, many times the determination of hearing loss is unknown. So I'm seeing K and L not being a surprise.
We're seeing quite at least relative to others, about a third of the population with genetically based or hereditary hearing loss. So that's by far the greatest represented group of individuals with hearing loss. And then after that, for those who do know the cause, we see a good distribution. Perhaps the second is after a disease or virus. We see kind of tied in about third being sudden onset after a loud noise exposure and due to aging. But again, we're seeing representation here across everything. The only thing we don't see is hearing loss as a result of medication that was toxic to the ear.
And that's interesting, James. We do have somebody in our panelists, among our panelists, who will relate to that medication that was toxic to the ear after chemotherapy.
So thank you for everyone for completing the first set of polling questions today and bearing with us through that. I know it's very important to get a sense of who we had represented. So now we get to move to the most important part of today, which is really where we get to start hearing directly from you, individuals living with hearing loss and direct caregivers. And we're going to go into that first topic that I mentioned. And so if we can show our session one discussion questions, these are what we'll be exploring with a panel discussion and then opening it up to all of you in the audience to help answer. And so here in this first session, we really want to understand what it is to live with hearing loss. We want to explore the symptoms and health effects that are a consequence of your hearing loss and those that have the most significant impact on you or your loved one's life. We're going to want to explore how hearing loss and the symptoms related to it might vary, whether that be from day to day, or in how they change over time, whether that be week to week, month to month, or over the course of years. We're going to be asking you not only about to help describe and help us understand what those symptoms and health effects are, but also help us understand how they impact your life, including important activities in your life that maybe you can't do at all or as fully because of your hearing loss and associated symptoms. And then knowing that not all of the manifestations of your hearing loss and the symptoms are things that you've already experienced, but maybe things that will come in the future. We want to explore any fears, worries, concerns you have for the future living with hearing loss. So to get us started on this topic, we have a panel of members of this community who are going to be sharing their experiences of living with hearing loss. We have Roxana, Tim, Catherine, Anna, and Jake. So Roxana, why don't you take it away?
I'm Roxana Rotundo, born in Venezuela, lived most of my life in the United States, and the recipient of 2 cochlear implants. We refer to them as CIs. This is my story before I did my CIs. My hearing loss started when I was 25 years old. At the beginning, it was only on the high frequency sounds, so women's voices were harder to understand that meant. With time, the loss started getting worse. I was diagnosed with a progressive hearing loss caused by an unknown autoimmune disease. At that time, I was starting my own business, a company that distributes films and TV shows to the Hispanic TV networks. I was doing very well. The first change I noticed was how some accents started to become very hard to understand. I noticed how, for example, people from Peru and Chile were very hard for me to follow. With time, things started to get worse, and what is called a drop in my hearing started to be more noticeable for me. I always say it's like a mourning process. Every time you have a drop, you need to mourn that loss. And for some days, you will feel very sad and shocked because you know it will get worse. I was a young woman entrepreneur being successful in a man-dominated industry, and it was not easy to accept my hearing loss in this environment. I buy films in movie festivals around the world, and the screening of the movies in the events without closed captions was starting to be almost impossible. I started to ask for the script before the presentation of the film so it would be easier for me to follow. But what was harder for me was the impact on the negotiation process. The biggest part of my job is negotiating the films in those same conventions, and who I was negotiating with started to become harder and harder depending on the tone of his or her voice. When I decided to tell a few people about my hearing loss, some people took advantage in negotiating meetings, saying they would tell me things that they did not. Because something that you notice when you lose your hearing is that you know when you hear well something and when you don't. I hid my hearing loss for a very long time, and let me tell you, it's exhausting. I started doing my business by email, and that never can be the same. My social life started being dominated by my hearing loss. I stopped going out with friends that were hard for me to understand, but at the time, you don't realize it. Although I'm bilingual, I prefer to speak Spanish because Spanish is a language that has less high-frequency sounds and more syllables on their words, and therefore it was easier for me to understand than English. This English accent that you're hearing, I did not have it on my 20s. When I see friends of my Jews, they are very shocked to hear my new accent. I'm part of a new story now in the University of Miami that explains how a person completely bilingual can still have better results in the hearing test in Spanish, even if Spanish is that person's second language. There is a huge self-stigma with hearing loss. It's not easy when you operate 100% in the hearing world to tell someone you don't hear well, and also to show your hearing aids. Hearing loss involves contents loss. When you are a cochlear implant candidate and have the courage to get the implant, they tell you there is a very high probability you will lose that little remaining hearing you have in the surgery. That impacted my decision to get a CI for many years. I wanted to hold to that little remaining hearing for some time, although in practical life it was not useful, but it was mine and it was so hard to let it go. I had my first CI 3 years ago and the second 1 year ago, and here I am after a lot of work in what I call the miracle of hearing back. There is so much information to share. Hearing loss is called the invisible disability because no one seeing you knows you have hearing loss. Even though I'm hearing all of you now, I'm deaf. If I take out my 2 processors, I hear nothing. So it's complicated for many to understand. The process is really scary, especially if you are alone and don't know anyone with hearing loss. That is why I just finished a documentary called We Hear You about my hearing loss experience and experiences of 3 friends. I will advocate as much as I can because there is so much work to be done. Thank you for hearing my story.
Hello everyone, my name is Tim Browning. My hearing loss journey started at birth. My parents thought I was such a nice, quiet baby with a tendency to get scared easily. It wasn't until I was 4 that I was diagnosed with moderate bilateral hearing loss. I was fitted with my first hearing aid with a long cord from my ear down to a neck pocket hearing aid holder. As you can guess, I went through a difficult stretch to catch up, starting with special education for children with hearing loss. It was there where I began learning how to speak, listen, and communicate. I started kindergarten at a regular school, and at first I thought how cool was it to show off my hearing thing gadget to my classmates. But as we got older, I started to realize the struggle to communicate with my classmates. My speaking vocabulary was limited, I missed words spoken to me, and I struggled to understand and just keep up. I felt inferior, and my classmates treated me as such because they didn't know better. Teasing, mocking how I talked, and bullying was a daily experience for me. It was difficult even to the point that I would keep track of how many summer vacation days were left before I had to return to school. You see, for me, it's not just hearing loss, but communication loss. I sounded off because I couldn't speak what I couldn't hear. I would misspeak words that had a S, a B, C, D, TH in them all the time. I would continue speech therapy throughout high school, but it only did so much. Being withdrawn and quiet was my coping mechanism, but it didn't save me from low self-esteem issues and isolation. I carried these struggles throughout my school life, doing everything I could to hide my hearing loss. Keeping my hair long over my ears, pretending to understand and smile, and even going to school without my hearing aid. But it didn't stop the anxiety and fear of hearing loss-related embarrassment. Teachers tried to help, but they simply didn't understand hearing loss in terms of the emotional and mental toll it took on me. Sitting me in front of the class wasn't always the answer because hearing loss includes other internal struggles. Dating for me was defeating. While guys had stylish haircuts, I continued to cover my hearing loss with what I call an outdated 70s haircut that won't go away. Not only did I look out of fashion, speaking on the phone was torture. Could I focus well enough to understand? But also imagine the voice on the other end noting my voice sounds a little funny. Like something is not quite right with me because I'm mispronouncing words. I cannot hide it on the phone, so I just never could let go and just be myself. Working in the corporate world after I finished school, I had success, but at a price. I would worry for days before speaking in front of people for fear could I understand if they asked me questions. What do I say in a meeting when my soft-spoken manager is asking me for advice? How in the world do I handle a conference call with people with thick accents? I can't tell you how exhausted I would feel afterwards, only to see my work associates on their merry way filled with energy. I could have advocated for myself, but I didn't feel comfortable, nor did I know better. I just dealt with it. Today, my hearing loss is now moderate to severe, so it takes a lot of mental energy for me to hear. Getting older, I find fatigue settles in more intensely. I can't enjoy my family and friends quite as much as I used to because I need more time to reset. It saddens me, but Zoom gathering, talking on the phone, social media just wears me out faster. I feel upset and frustrated because I can't seem to build that hearing endurance. Even worse, I sometimes just don't realize how the hearing fatigue I am and how it sets me indirectly down a road of despair without realizing it. I have fears about the future. Dementia and hearing loss seem to show a strong correlation. Will I lose my memory, my mind? If I get more fatigued with hearing loss, how can I find the energy to keep my mind sharp? I can advocate, but some days I find I just don't have the energy. It takes mental and emotional energy to ask people to speak up, talk slower, or show patience with me, and then they forget. Sometimes I realize I just check out with my hearing environment too overwhelming, and my tinnitus is getting worse as my hearing gets worse. I have no comprehension of what having a quiet moment in my head sounds like. I hate to say this, but it feels like a dark cloud hanging over me that just won't go away, so it's all I can do to just accept the situation and do the best I can. I worry that the future will properly represent the hearing loss community and me. Will I have the accommodations at the airport, entertainment venues, and hospital to understand, comprehend, and make sound decisions even if I'm too tired to advocate? If loop systems, assistive technologies, and awareness from the hearing community for my needs are not adequately in place and understood, will it just be too easy for me to isolate and feel hopeless?
My name is Catherine Boughton. I lost my hearing when I was 30. I woke up one morning and found I was deaf in my left ear. I was also hypersensitive to noise, and I flinched at any kind of clatter. At first, I was frightened, but I was thoroughly tested and nothing was found. I decided I could live with it. I could still hear with my right ear. I didn't get hearing aids, and the cause was never determined. But over the next 40 years, the loss progressed and it became bilateral. I'm now profoundly deaf in that left ear, and I have a cochlear implant. I use a hearing aid in my right ear. Neither allows me to hear in any way resembling normal hearing. As my hearing worsened over the years, I went through periods of panic and depression. It took me a long time to learn to live with hearing loss. I can hear sound, but I can't distinguish speech. I'm a good speech reader, and this supplements my ability to function. But COVID was an enormous setback. Over the past year, I've been unable to understand anything said by someone wearing a mask. Unfortunately, I spent much of 2020 in hospitals with my husband, who was being treated for cancer. His chemotherapy treatments took all day. The chemotherapy suite, an open plan to facilitate communication, was a nightmare acoustically. The hospital did not have clear masks. I tried using my smartphone captioning app, but the noise in the room drowned out the speaker, so the captions didn't work. It was intensely frustrating not to be able to hear what nurses and doctors were saying. As my husband's caregiver, I worried that I was missing vital information. I also worried that if I asked for us to be moved to a quieter place, or if I asked the nurses to talk to me separately, that I would shift the focus to myself. I would make my needs paramount. The nurses were already overwhelmed and my husband was dying. I explained, but I didn't demand. Sometimes I had to leave the hospital because it was too much for me. Masks will continue to be used in hospitals long after COVID, and unless clear masks become routinely available, I dread having to go back into that situation. Oddly, my best days have also been in the past year. I'm a writer and an advocate for people with hearing loss. Because every meeting was held virtually, I was able to continue working with my committees and groups. I could follow along with captions, either provided by the host or using my phone app. I did the same with social gatherings. I've felt more present in meetings in the past year than ever before in my life. I'm not looking forward to the post-COVID world. My hearing friends can't wait till we go back to restaurants and dinner parties. But because it's almost impossible for me to hear speech in noise, that means going back to sitting at a table and smiling because I can't follow a word being said. The impact of my hearing loss was also significant when I was working. I was a newspaper editor and writer. Although I told my department heads that I had hearing loss, they forgot repeatedly. I was expected to attend daily meetings, to have business discussions on the phone, to understand what someone across a room was saying. The stigma of hearing loss is pervasive and hugely damaging, and it is self-fulfilling. I was reluctant to ask for accommodations, and eventually I couldn't do the job anymore. I took early retirement at 62. My employer would have found another position for me, but I wanted the one I had. Self-stigma was at work here. I was too proud to acknowledge my loss, too ashamed to accept a position that would have been an acknowledgement of my disability. My biggest concern going forward, now that I'm a widow and living alone, is whether my grown children will trust me with their children. I'm not sure that I would trust me with their children. I worry about this, even though I don't even have grandchildren yet. But I've always wanted to be an active grandparent, a babysitter while their parents work, or to take them on vacations. I'm afraid that my hearing loss may make that too risky. The most frustrating thing about my hearing loss is that despite having the most sophisticated and most expensive devices, I still can't hear. I know that hearing loss is complicated. I know that hearing is complicated, but I still think that hearing devices should work better. I'm certain that the stigma associated with hearing loss has delayed serious work on hearing technology until very recently. Even now, for myself, there are times when I want to retreat into isolation rather than take the initiatives that would allow me to continue to be an active member of society. But I know that isolation leads to depression, and I know that depression can contribute to dementia. So I push on. I don't want my life to be lost because of the stigma of seeming old and useless. I don't want my life to be lost because I can't hear. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anna Westrick. I have genetic progressive hearing loss in both ears and started wearing hearing aids at the age of 43. I'm the mother of 2 boys who are 11 and 12 years old, and I work as an anesthesiologist in the community hospital in my town. I also serve in administrative roles in the world of quality and patient safety in my hospital system. Even though I grew up with a mother and a brother who had diagnosed hearing loss, I did not realize I had hearing loss myself until later in life. The first symptom I noticed was tinnitus, or ringing in my ears. Even though it would bother me at night, I still was lucky enough that I could sleep, and usually I just ignored it. But I actually started to realize that I had hearing loss when I had trouble hearing my youngest son, who has a high-pitched voice, when we were talking in the car and he was in the back seat, or when he was calling to me from another room and I couldn't hear him. I also noticed I had difficulty in bars and loud restaurants, and I noticed that I had trouble hearing casual conversation while working in the operating room if people weren't facing me. All of these things led me to finally go and get my hearing tested. And in the audiologist's office, I found out that I had severe high-frequency hearing loss. Over the next year, my family had genetic testing, and I found out what the autosomal dominant gene was. And I also found out that both of my children had that hearing loss gene. The Genetic Testing Center also provided me with a predictive model for what my hearing loss will look like and in the future as my disease progresses. My hearing loss impacts me on a daily basis in personal and work situations. When we could still eat in restaurants, I would have a lot of trouble hearing full conversations in the loud restaurant. For work meetings, this has resulted in difficult situations where I'm forced to repeatedly ask for my colleagues to repeat themselves and clarify. Socially, loud bars and coffee shops are settings that make casual conversation with friends stressful, even if I'm wearing my hearing aids. This has resulted in some embarrassing misunderstandings and makes what should be a relaxing night out stressful. At work, during in-person meetings, none of the auditoriums and conference rooms where I work are hearing accessible. In the past, because the main speakers were usually mic'd, I could hear them clearly. But questions from committee members or sidebar conversations were very difficult. Now that meetings are all online, it's rare that I find a Zoom meeting or other online platform meeting set up with high quality, real-time closed captioning or transcription. There may be closed captioning as an automated or free function, but it's often inaccurate. And closed caption that's not accurate makes it more difficult for me to follow the discussion as I'm trying to read and listen at the same time and reconcile the two inputs to make sense of what's being discussed. So at this time, my best solution is to use noise cancellation headphones and make sure I'm in a quiet environment for all meetings. In my job, I have to wear masks in the operating room. Since the pandemic, I wear masks at all times in the hospital. Masks make it even harder for me to understand conversation as the mask covers up nonverbal expression cues and makes lip reading impossible. I've noticed that the masks also make it very difficult for my older patients to hear me. In my job, I have to establish rapport with my patients in a very stressful time right before they're about to undergo a procedure or a surgery. And when they struggle to hear me, it makes this essential connection very challenging to establish. The pandemic has made this healthcare-related communication problem even more obvious. And while I know that there are clear masks available, my hospital does not use them for patients or staff with hearing loss at this time. I know my hearing loss is progressive. The predictive progression model given to me through genetic testing shows a steady decline expected. So far, thankfully, I have not had measurable deterioration in my own hearing. However, I worry about how my hearing loss will impact my ability to communicate with family and friends as it becomes more severe. I worry that I will have difficulty keeping in touch with my children when they go away to college. I worry that I will have difficulty participating in family reunions and other large, loud family gatherings. I hope new technology will become available to address these personal and professional challenges with hearing, and eventually, I hope that there's cures for genetic hearing loss when identified.
My name is Jake, and I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. My experience with hearing loss was unfortunately a very sudden and big mistake, and like a lot of people who have made that same mistake, I was completely unaware of the dangers and consequences of damaging my ear. Like most kids, I had zero problems with my ears growing up. It wasn't until I turned 18 when my dad asked me to go on a hunting trip with him out west. I'm not a hunter, and I had no interest, but he sort of persuaded me with it being a father and son trip, so I ultimately decided to go with him. On the first day, everyone decided I was going to shoot first. We woke up at 3 in the morning, and it being super early and pitch black outside, we forgot our earplugs. The rifles we were using were very powerful, and while I didn't really think anything significant was going to happen, I vaguely knew that loud sounds were bad for your ears. Everyone in the group told me that, despite not having any earplugs, that I would be totally fine and that nothing bad was going to happen and that I should stop worrying about it. I conceded, thinking they were right, and eventually fired the gun. The initial blast felt like it smacked the side of my head. My right ear didn't receive any trauma, but my left ear did. Almost immediately after I fired the shot, I knew I had done something very bad. It felt like my ear was numb, and I could clearly tell something was wrong. I tried to play it off like it was fine, like it was only temporary. But after about a day, it became very clear that it wasn't temporary, and I had clearly injured myself. When I got home, I started to notice something that would quickly become the worst part of my injury. I started having sound sensitivity in my left ear, also known as hyperacusis. I also started experiencing tinnitus that was tied in with the hyperacusis. I started to become really worried about what I was experiencing, but I had an ENT appointment the following day after I came home, so I figured that the doctor would fix me up and I'd end up being fine. I went to the doctor and explained what happened. I was put through several tests, but ultimately he came in the room and apologized to me and told me that there was really nothing he could do for me. I came home, sat at my kitchen table, and put my head down and started sobbing. The gravity of the situation completely emotionally overwhelmed me, and I had this realization that my life as I knew it was basically over, and this was my new reality. Over the years, dealing with the damage to my ear has been somewhat of a process. The symptoms I had experienced have stretched far beyond just the hearing damage and hyperacusis and tinnitus. Nearly a year after my initial injury, I started noticing I was having balance issues. I started developing vertigo, which turned into vestibular migraines, which had basically taken control of my life. My ear sensitivity causes migraines, which in turn makes my ear sensitivity and tinnitus even worse. All of this has caused major strife in my life and has made things much more complicated. Being younger, I almost feel like there's an invisible barrier between me and my social life and people my age. Stuff like going out with your friends, going to noisy restaurants, going to the movies, etc., things that no one even really thinks about, have become daily battles. And more often than not, I feel isolated from my family and friends. It really feels like I'm sort of watching everyone else live their lives while I'm stuck in place, hoping maybe one day to return to normal life.
Wow. Thank you, Jake, and to all of our panelists for topic one, for sharing your experiences of what it is to live with hearing loss, the symptoms, the impacts on your life. So important for us to hear your stories, your journeys living with hearing loss. And that's exactly what we want to do now with the broader audience that we have with us live today. So this is my first opportunity to invite you, if you'd like to share your experience living with hearing loss, to call in by phone You can dial in at 1-703-844-3231. Again, that's 1-703-844-3231. We invite you, even if you're using a caption telephone, to please call in. We'd be very eager to hear your voices, hear your experiences. But to get us started thinking about this topic of what it is to live with hearing loss, we're going to go back to the polls. So I'll ask you to pull your phone back out, go to that second tab you had open, go back to pollev.com/HLAA. This is for all of our individuals living with hearing loss and their direct caregivers. Even if you're joining us and weren't able to answer the earlier polling questions, we still would love for you to answer these. So if we can go to our first polling question, we want to know which of the following hearing loss related health concerns do you have or does your loved one who lives with hearing loss have, either currently or have had in the past. And here we want you to select all that apply. The options are A, trouble hearing with background noise, B, difficulty hearing higher pitched sounds, C, sounds that are muffled, D, issues communicating verbally, E, trouble with balance or vertigo, F, headaches, G, difficulty hearing consonants, H, fatigue, I, loss of initiative or interest in work or hobbies, J, social isolation or avoidance, K, mood changes, things like depression or anxiety, L, tinnitus, or M, some other health concerns or symptoms of your hearing loss that you have had either currently or in the past, or for those of you who are caregivers that your loved one has had. And please select all that apply. One thing I'll note is that on these polling questions, when we have more than one response option, what you're seeing is a percentage of the total responses. So that does not reflect a percentage of people who selected a particular response. So the easiest way to think about these is kind of bars that are ranking. So we see here first that A, trouble hearing with background noise, is the top selected of these different health concerns. After that, it's looking like sounds being muffled, followed by difficulty hearing higher pitched sounds and fatigue, as well as social isolation and avoidance being the next highest. But we really do see quite a range here. Every symptom we selected or listed being selected. And then also we see other symptoms. Response option M, we're seeing other things that we haven't listed. So we want to make sure that we hear about those things as well. We want to hear about even maybe less common symptoms or health concerns and what those are. So if you can call in, again, you can write in under the live stream with your comments. We'll be reading some of those as well. So if we move to our second polling question, now we want to know of those same health-related concerns. We want here now you have to think about what are the top 3 most troublesome concerns that you have or have had. So the same response options. I won't reread them all this second time, but you'll see they're the same as from the first polling question. Here, select up to 3 of those that you view as most troublesome to you or your loved one's life as a result of hearing loss and other associated symptoms. I promised that these would be a little harder, and I'm sure all of these health concerns have impacts on your lives, but here we want you to think and pick those that you think are those that most create the most burden or trouble for you in your daily lives.
James, I think it's interesting that the top 2, one is purely a communication problem, and the second one is a psychosocial problem, the social isolation or avoidance.
Yes, and I think it'll be really important for us to hear from those of you calling in, writing in, how some of these more direct symptoms actually do impact some of those bigger picture or more downstream issues like social isolation and avoidance. I would guess that there's a relationship between A and J here that we'll be hearing about. But we'll give you a couple more moments here to get your responses in. We're seeing those as the highest. After that, we're seeing a cluster of difficulty hearing higher pitched voices, sounds being muffled, issues communicating verbally, and